Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. By the time this video is uploaded, it will probably be Thursday, August 24th, 2023. And we just wrapped up the first ever 2024 Republican primary debate consisting of 8 candidates: Governor Nikki Haley, Governor Ron DeSantis, Governor Doug Burgum, Governor Asa Hutchinson, Senator Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, Vice President Mike Pence, and Governor Chris Christie. This debate was a very fascinating one, to say the least, with a lot of mudslinging, a lot of argumentation, a lot of differences when it comes down to very peculiar issues that the Republican Party seems to care about. In this video, we're going to be going through a list of those who are the winners and losers of this year's 2024 GOP debate, the first ever of its kind, and will likely be a very important one as we move ahead for the future of the party. You see, where we are today, the GOP has been put into a position where they are running candidates that are far from being the destined nominee. The 8 candidates on the debate stage are in single digits or barely double digits when it comes down to national polling data. The 2024 GOP nomination is very much led by the former president, who refused to attend tonight's debate and instead opted for an interview with the now exiled journalist Tucker Carlson from the Fox News Network. He decided to coincide the debate alongside the debate with this interview in a big snub to the Fox News Network. It was a very interesting decision by the former president, but certainly the right one politically speaking. He leads with 55.4% of the vote, with just one candidate in double digits, Governor Ron DeSantis, and everybody else in low single digits, with the exception of Vivek Ramaswamy. Which is why this debate decision about who's the winner, who's the loser, will make an important mark on the future of this GOP primary, as the Republican Party, the RNC, begins to up their decision around who can be qualified for these debates. They up the qualifications. They're upping the fundraising numbers. They're upping everything in general because they want to narrow the field. And inevitably, they want Donald Trump to be at this debate stage. They want him to be in a direct competition between Governor Ron DeSantis or Governor Chris Christie or whoever it might be who can make it this far when it comes down to the GOP primary. So, to see where the future might lie for some of these candidates, we've decided we're going to go ahead and take a look at the winners, the and the losers. This middle ground here will be further elaborated upon with an eventual decision about who actually is the winner, who actually is a loser when it comes down to the GOP debate. But to start off, we will start with this winner column, and we will preface it by saying that this performance was certainly outside of our expectations. The expectations were exceeded by this candidate, and they came from this idea, this sect of the Republican Party that can only be represented by her, which is conservative feminism. Now, I'm not here to say that that was the entire reason why I believe Nikki Haley was a winner this evening when it came down to the GOP debates, but she certainly strikes me as one of the most powerful debaters on that stage. I think she really served as a juxtaposition to every other man on that stage and represented a significant portion of the Republican Party that is comprised of female voters. Nikki Haley, as the former governor of South Carolina, came into this and balanced her attacks on everybody on and off the debate stage, including former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden, but ultimately came forth as this sensible, approached Republican. She made herself more electable in the general election while also balancing the conservative values, calling herself vehemently pro-life, but recognizing that a national abortion ban would never actually happen and that false promises are being led on by these other GOP candidates. It was a very interesting take on a race, on a decision and a topic that the GOP seems to be very much lopsided on. But to her, she appealed to general election voters and certainly advanced her ability to win the general election. The only downside here is that I think she might have just lost the VP nomination for Donald Trump. I've been saying for a long time that Nikki Haley or Tim Scott are the likeliest to be the VP nominees for Donald Trump. After tonight's attacks, I don't know how easy he will go on her, but keep in mind that then Senator Kamala Harris ripped into then former Vice President Joe Biden before they eventually ran together on a winning ticket. So, Nikki Haley, the clear winner in tonight's debate. But she isn't the only one. She's joined by former President Donald Trump, which might come across as a surprise for someone who didn't even enter the debate stage. And the reason for that is because as the former president, he didn't exactly come across as the most discussed subject. For somebody who's garnering over half of the GOP primary vote, he was discussed less than the issue of abortion was. He, of many people, should have been the frontward-facing person on this debate stage even without being there. His absence overshadowed the debate entirely, but during the debate, the Republican Party primary candidates refused to allow his name to really come into play. They refused to speak on the issues that involved him. They refused to talk about the indictment. They refused to talk about January 6th. They avoided him like the plague because, quite frankly, as the frontrunner of the GOP nomination, he has the power, and many of them were auditioning for tonight's VP spot. He avoided heavy criticism from many of the candidates, notably Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie, who didn't really rip into the former president in the way that you might have expected for people who, in many other ways, are willing to do anything for their political power. Right now, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are in this position where they did well after tonight's debate, even though only one of them was in attendance. Then we're going to move over into the column where I would say this is just the middle ground. There isn't a clear directive if they won or lost the debate, and you can make arguments for both sides. Again, by the end of the video, I will have a conclusion as to what I ultimately think comes from this debate, but I'm telling you now, I think that this column is the most interesting one because it's up for interpretation. So, to start off in this middle ground column, we have former Vice President Mike Pence, who came into this debate with not super high polling numbers at 3 to 4% nationwide, and I don't expect him to move too heavily. The reason I have him in this column is because he held his ground. He made a point to call out people like Governor Ron DeSantis and ask them directly, do you stand with my decision on the day of January 6th? Do you believe I made the right choice as vice president? And he kept himself relevant. On the other side, he was booed out. The public wasn't super happy with him as a candidate altogether. They certainly didn't like his indirect attacks on President Donald Trump, and while he did make a couple of pushbacks, especially very, very aggressive pushbacks against Vivek Ramaswamy, altogether he came across as this candidate who wasn't necessarily as put together as he was in that vice presidential debate against Kamala Harris, against Tim Kaine, but he did bring a strong ground. He was able to hold his own. He didn't collapse under pressure in the way that Donald Trump has directly or indirectly said that was going to happen, but he has made some comments that I think will keep him relevant for the existing future, but I don't see much movement on his end. The next person that I would say is in this middle ground column is Vivek Ramaswamy, who to some people came across as a very clear winner in tonight's debate, but to me, really did not. I think Vivek Ramaswamy had a lot of great moments. In the very beginning, he was striking me as someone who was really on track to do very well. I thought that after tonight's debate, about 30 minutes in, that he was going to leave as the second place candidate nationwide, that he was going to strip away Ron DeSantis' support after these attacks that he's made on everybody that he has called out. But when he started pushing into comments around climate change, around Ukraine, around issues that the American public is generally unified on, he lost the electability in the general election, and I honestly think he has lost the VP nomination for Donald Trump. Allow me to explain that too. Not necessarily in the way that Nikki Haley did, because Nikki Haley did in fact attack Donald Trump. Vivek Ramaswamy was one of his most, ardent defenders. But he did not provide himself enough of a centrist middle ground approach the way that Nikki Haley did to win the general election. He is a mini Donald Trump. You can't win with two Trumps. Donald Trump knew that in 2016. He went to Mike Pence because he knew that Mike Pence's presidentialism would balance the unpolitically correct, the seeming extremist values that Donald Trump held nationally, and it allowed this general election ticket to make it through one election. Donald Trump knows that Ramaswamy wouldn't be adding to his ticket, but rather just feeding into the same exact base, feeding into the Make America Great Again wing. While Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't debate in the same style as Donald Trump, he's certainly way too fast for that, and doesn't necessarily win over GOP voters in the same way, calling climate change a hoax, saying we should not be funding Ukraine, going after well-respected people within the GOP. Vivek Ramaswamy tried to be Donald Trump tonight, but ultimately failed, and by the end of the debate, I honestly I was not super impressed by his closing, by his performance beyond the first 30 to 45 minutes. That's where I really think he shined. And then after that comment from Chris Christie about him being ChatGPT, I ultimately think he plummeted. Now, we're going to return back to this middle ground column. I want to go into the loser column because I think there is a candidate, two candidates here who really jumped out as the immediate losers of tonight's GOP debate. That's Governor Doug Burgum of the state of North Dakota and Governor Asa Hutchinson of the state of Arkansas. These two candidates on their own right wouldn't even have been here without these $20 promises or consistent begging and campaigning across social media apps to barely cross that 40,000 donor threshold. These two candidates are only here because of their ability to work very small groups of people on social media and with monetary benefits that allowed them to be on tonight's debate stage. That's why once it is raised, the requirements to be here, anything above 1%, they simply do not qualify. And I think looking at how infrequently they spoke at tonight's debate, I mean, we can see here that the lowest speaking candidates were Asa Hutchinson, were Doug Burgum. There's a reason for that. They were far from the most called on, the least referenced, and the least relevant on tonight's debate stage. Vivek Ramaswamy came out there and said in his opening, who is this guy, right? Calling that comment that Chris Christie, drew a direct comparison to Obama's comment here, but Vivek Ramaswamy was more well-known tonight and will be more well-known than Asa Hutchinson, than Doug Burgum, even though both of them were governors or are governors, existing people in office right now. These candidates simply have not made enough of a name for themselves where it is very clear right now that they did in fact not only lose the debate, but will likely have to drop out over the next couple of weeks if they do not qualify in time for September's debate, which after tonight, I really do not think is going to happen. The next candidate that I would say has lost tonight's debate, which might be a surprise to some, Senator Tim Scott of the state of South Carolina, who came into this being this sensible senator from South Carolina, came into this being a very strong candidate for the general election. He simply didn't exude any type of major energy or enthusiasm that would be necessary to be the GOP nominee. He could be good as a vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump. I think after tonight, he's probably the most likely. But I don't think as a presidential candidate or a Republican primary candidate that he captivated any audiences. He spoke the least besides Doug Burgum and Asa Hutchinson, and for a reason. People didn't address him. The only time you really saw that was when Vivek Ramaswamy would make these major overarching claims about everyone being bought out, and then very infrequently throughout the remainder of that 2-hour debate. Tim Scott's performance was far from impressive. Nikki Haley served to be the sensible Republican from South Carolina, and I think we will find that after tonight's debate, though he is polling at 3% nationwide, there will be a slight decrease in his support nationally, and a slight uptick for Nikki Haley. So, where are we right now? Tim Scott in the loser column, Asa Hutchinson, Doug Burgum also in the loser column. The winning column here, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. The column, Mike Pence and Vivek Ramaswamy, down to two people who we are going to do Ron DeSantis last since he is the current second place candidate nationwide. Chris Christie tonight did not impress me. Leading into this debate, he promised a fiery performance, calling out, going after Donald Trump himself and his enablers. In many of his TV interviews, in his radio interviews, in his campaign stumps, he has been very clear that those who enable the former president are doing a disservice to this country. That Donald Trump did, in fact, try to overturn a free and fair election. That Donald Trump did, in fact, and is, in fact, guilty in many ways of the stuff he is being accused of by many, many prosecutors. What you find here is that Chris Christie came into this debate with all this expected energy, all this expected, anger directed towards these candidates. And ultimately, he didn't perform that well. He did not follow through on going after Donald Trump and his enablers. He did not perform the way he promised. And it also just simply didn't do as well for him as he did in 2016. Remember him calling out Marco Rubio, tanking that GOP campaign? He didn't do that to anyone, and he certainly didn't bring that level of enthusiasm or energy to tonight's debate. He was also booed out multiple times. He tried to speak directly to the GOP primary voters, but they made it clear that the party of Christie is no longer the GOP today. that Chris Christie's 2013-2014 lead in national polling data for the 2016 nomination is no longer the GOP of today. Even though he got a lot of speaking time, was called out a lot, he may have made a name for himself for him to survive for the next couple of debates, but I certainly do not think he came out tonight a winner, and given the high expectations for himself, I do believe he fell flat. So, Chris Christie in the loser column, and Ron DeSantis, I would say, isn't a winner, but he isn't a loser in that right either. I think he avoided heavy criticism as a frontrunner. He managed himself. He didn't bring the enthusiasm that he needed for this debate performance. He didn't bring the big change and support. He didn't bring the saving of his campaign, but he sustained it. He allowed himself to remain in this prominent position and will allow himself to be this second place candidate as we move forward. Potentially third, but honestly speaking, second place. He didn't have this good debate performance to be Donald Trump's VP, but he isn't that bad. He had a mediocre performance at best. But I don't think it's necessarily a loss, which is also why I do not believe it's a win. But as we head into this next list, which is the same type of, list here with just two additional options, potential loser, potential winner, these are the ways that we will clear out the middle ground column. This is our way of making a decisive call, even though I personally do not think I want to. But I have to do it. I promised you guys a winners and loser list. I didn't promise you a third option, which is exactly what we're going to do here. So based off the people I've already characterized in the clear winner and clear loser column, you know where I stand on those candidates. For example, Chris Christie, I think, was honestly a clear loser in tonight's race. I think Donald Trump was a clear winner. I think Nikki Haley was also a clear winner. Let's go ahead and switch them there, see if we can do a type of swapperoo. Doug Burgum, very much a clear loser. No arguing there. Asa Hutchinson, also a clear loser as well. I don't think there's any arguing on that front. So you have Asa Hutchinson, Doug Burgum, Tim Scott, and Chris Christie in the clear loser column. And then amongst the potential winner, potential loser, we're going to go through this middle ground column. So we'll start off in the way we did before. Vice President Mike Pence, I think, is a potential loser. I think there are some redeeming qualities that he has maintained: recognition, relevance, some level of a built-in brand within the GOP. But I don't think he won in tonight's debate. I don't think he left tonight with more support than he began. But I don't think he necessarily lost any support either. There is a sect of the Republican Party that is very, very much on his side. It's not large, it's not great, but it is enough to keep him in these debates and potentially, in some reality, to face off against Donald Trump should he stay in the race. He's been struggling with donors, but as many other candidates do inevitably drop out, they will start to shift around, and he will probably find a way to get him slightly over the checkmark line, slightly into the requirements being enough for him to be there. But after tonight's debate, I don't see him as a winner. If there was a side to choose, I would say that Mike Pence lost in tonight's debate. Not by a lot. It was very marginal here for me to make this call, but I don't think he came away with more support than he started with. Vivek Ramaswamy, the next candidate here, who I would say I have had a lot of internal deliberation. Do I call him a potential winner? Do I call him a potential loser? I would say he's a potential winner for now. He did make a lot of extreme points. He did lose general election viability and probably just lost his VP nomination for President Trump. But he made a name for himself. He proved that this 30-something-year-old could take on the vice president, could take on senators, could take on governors, that he is this very strong defender of President Trump while also building his own brand. I think Vivek Ramaswamy will be a force to reckon with as we move forward. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. He's going to meet the fundraising threshold. He's going to meet the polling threshold. He is going to be in this race for quite a while. And that's a problem for many other candidates, because as he is taking on many of them, not necessarily one by one, it seemed as if everyone was ganging around Vivek Ramaswamy more than they were Ron DeSantis. It was just an interesting dynamic. I think that Ramaswamy, again, did see some drawbacks of tonight's debate performance. He started off very strong. 30 minutes in, I would have said he was a clear winner. An hour and a half later, I have him in this slight winner column, and for a while, I thought maybe I would ultimately call him a loser of tonight's debate. Ramaswamy did not perform as well as I think he could have. Being president of a debating union, being very well-versed, a very good orator, he spoke too fast. I don't think he reached people where they were. I think it was a little bit too much for him as a new candidate. But maybe that's just the way he talks. Maybe that's just the way he debates. Maybe that's the way he wins. but I don't think it was a clear, decisive victory for him this evening. But ultimately, if I was to call one direction or the other, I put him in the winning column. Final person here, Governor Ron DeSantis. I think a lot of us have been thinking about where does Ron DeSantis go from here. I think, given the pluses and minuses, he stays a potential winner. I'm not here to say that Ron DeSantis blew it out of the water. We knew that simply didn't happen. He did not have an extremely strong debate performance. That's a problem for him because as we get closer to the 2024 nomination, as we get to a point where there will be more polls, more statewide primaries, more debates, he needs to make a clear name for himself. He struggles with enthusiasm. He struggles with genuineness. He struggles with this idea that he is a robot. And after tonight's debate performances, I do not believe he is going to be able to beat those allegations just yet. I don't think that he comes across as this really humanized figure in the way that he needs to win. I don't think there's any reality that any of these candidates actually take on Donald Trump and win, unless there is some type of major revelation when it comes down to these indictments. He ends up in jail earlier than some of the primary processes. I don't know if that's happening, and it is a very, very, very slim chance. That is the only reality that I see any of these candidates actually defeating Donald Trump in a primary or becoming the GOP nominee. But if he still wants to remain relevant, if he still wants a 2028 campaign, DeSantis can still do that. Tonight's debate's performance should be a lesson that there are ways to talk to the American public. Loosening up, as he did in the final half of the debate, was good for him. He came across as more human, more genuine, more to the person, right? Talking about his time as a veteran. Wasn't just canned speeches. His closure wasn't amazing. He repeated exactly what he said in the intro, and it sounded repetitive. It sounded like Washington, D.C. But a lot of that in between 10 and 11 p.m., impressed me for Governor DeSantis based on his performances. But the hour leading up, I really don't think there was much there for him. And I think that is the lesson that he will take away from this. At least this is his campaign. Hopefully, he's learning from it. But ultimately, I think that this is not a clear, decisive victory, but a narrow one. And one that I think will haunt him should he lose the primary, because tonight's debate performance could have gone a lot better. So the final call here, the clear, decisive victories, UN Ambassador, former Governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, and President Donald Trump. In the clear loser column, Governor Asa Hutchinson, Governor Doug Burgum, Senator Tim Scott, and Governor Chris Christie. And of those who I think are mediocre but ultimately leaned more towards the losing side, Vice President Mike Pence, and the mediocre winners, Governor Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy. We will see how the 2024 betting odds change. They are changing rapidly throughout the night, going up and down, back and forth, and the polling data might stay the same. The reason I say that, because there isn't much room for movement. Though I think Nikki Haley did very well tonight, she's still at 3% nationwide. There aren't that many undecided voters left, and there's certainly not a lot of the anti-Trump vote still out there. But it's possible that she peels away from DeSantis, peels away from Ramaswamy, peels away from Tim Scott, builds a bigger name for himself, pitches herself as the VP nominee for Donald Trump, because that's what everybody is campaigning for. That's what tonight's debate ultimately became about. When he removed himself, he said, "This will be now for my viewing pleasure." I think that's exactly what happened. We'll see how everyone adjusts moving forward. We'll see how the voters react to tonight's debate. We will see the final numbers on viewership to see if people even watched the debate in the first place. It'll be fascinating. It'll be fun to watch. It'll be amazing to follow, and I'll be there with you every step of the way. So make sure to stay tuned as we track polling data over the next couple of days, weeks, and months, because we will see a direct impact, or maybe not, of these debates and whether winning or losing ultimately makes a difference. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 GOP nomination election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.